Manhunt. Oh sweet Jesus, Manhunt. So I was at a loss for what to do for Halloween this year, so I threw a feeler out to my Twitter followers and somebody suggested Manhunt, and this is actually a game that I have a bit to say about, unlike whatever this monstrosity is. Plus, it's also a game that I have a bit of history with. However, while I don't like to do this, this is a game that has extreme gratuitous violence baked into its identity, and while I feel like I can stretch the limits in most cases, this is one instance where I think I'm gonna have to break out the censorship gloves so this video doesn't get marked for adult content. So Manhunt, this is an interesting one. This is one of the many Rockstar Games outings in the 6th generation because they were making games pretty much yearly back then, as crazy as that may sound these days, and it came out right at the peak of their bad reputation, you know, before Jack Thompson was disbarred. As such, it caused no small amount of moral panic, as was the style at the time, because gaming was an easy scapegoat to blame all the tragedies of the world on. That way politicians didn't actually have to fix any real issues. Thankfully, these moral panics have become fewer and further between. I'd like to think it's because gaming has become more accepted in mainstream media, but the realist in me realizes it's more likely that companies like EA and Microsoft are in the pockets of lobbyists, and so it's no longer financially sound to blame tragedies on video games. Though Manhunt is one of the rare cases where I'm actually on the fence about whether or not it deserved the flack it got. But we'll put a pin in that for a second. This game is set in Carcer City, a midwestern US town known for its high crime rate and poverty. In fact, many parts of the game look straight up abandoned. If I had to guess, I think this city is based on one of the really run-down Rust Belt cities. Maybe not Detroit, but maybe a smaller city with a higher crime rate like Benton Harbor or Saginaw. Within this small dilapidated city, you play as James Earl Cash, death row inmate being executed by lethal injection. But in actuality, he's only sedated and later awakes to find himself alone and trapped with some douche talking to him over a loudspeaker. A man calling himself the Director, who's hired a whole bunch of gangs to hunt him down and kill him. But the Director claims that if he survives all the trials, James will get his freedom. This is all in aid of a snuff film ring that the Director is heading. As such, there's an investigative journalist whose name never gets fully spoken aloud. This is the most we get.
Whether or not he will ever be allowed to direct again.
She wants to expose this whole operation and take the Director down. As far as miles per gallon, this is probably one of the most story-light games that Rockstar Games made post-GTA 3. Because while there are some developments later on into the game, the majority of the game is simply a level-by-level excursion where you have to make it through various challenges until eventually you're rescued from the whole ordeal by the journalist. Then after that, you do more linear levels with various challenges to evade the corrupt cops, then you're captured again, but escape to take the Director out once and for all. There's a lingering through line of the Director who's revealed to be a guy named Lionel Starkweather having this private security detail who's organizing everything, and whenever Cash thinks he's out of the woods, they knock him out and drag him to the next area with the next gang of crazies, which is basically the only time you get character interactions worth a damn. Also, it says something about where we are as a society that I was not shocked one bit by the violence in this game, but I was genuinely taken aback at somebody using the F slur.
Okay, you limp dick let's give Mr. Starkweather a show to remember.
It's like, oh yeah, that's just something people said back in the day, and nobody ever thought twice about it. Though I'm just gonna throw this out there, you can establish horrible characters as horrible characters by making them say horrible things. That just makes the dialogue more realistic. Horrible people in real life don't tend to censor themselves. I'm thinking of one moment in the second Percy Jackson book where a bully calls Tyson a slur, and when that moment comes up in the TV show, they need to keep that in. Why? Because when it comes to middle school bullying, that is as authentic as it gets. Once you do escape the wrath of Starkweather, there's a lingering intrigue about the police chief being in on the snuff ring, but that's not really expanded upon. In fact, I don't even remember if you ever see the police chief at all. But this is their justification for why you kill cops after you escape Starkweather, because they're all corrupt and in on the gig. But even with the general inability to insert compelling drama, they still couldn't help but to attempt to contrivedly pull our heartstrings. Such as in the level where you have to rescue James's family, which is kind of funny to me. The dude's on death row, so presumably he did a lot of horrible things. Do you really think he's motivated by his family? It's almost laughable. But apparently he does care, because even if you do rescue all of them, there's an entire level that hinges around you finding a videotape and then a TV to play the tape on, so you can see your family being massacred by Starkweather himself despite you rescuing them. And Cash is actually upset with it? Dude, you're a psychopath. Start acting like it. It might have worked if they established him as somebody who got put on death row for a crime he didn't commit, but then the gameplay would be incongruous because no sane person would dismember the human body in all the wild and wonderful ways that James does. So it's a catch-22, or even a catch-88. But even if he was established as a person who might care about his family, why should I? They're not established characters, they're just generic character models who we've never seen before. Without any establishment of emotional stakes, it feels like this is a plot point written by AI and lacks any sort of human emotion. And you know what? I wouldn't even have an issue with this if they didn't try to push the plot point into my face. If you want to make the game a mindless gorefest, fair enough, but if you want to add emotional depth, you have to commit to it.
Tell me when I'm telling lies!
But given how this game is structured, with you spending most of it alone in the wilderness fending for yourself, I really don't see there being many ways for them to have made the story more involved. But the devs were definitely hedging their bets, for the appeal being the gratuitous violence of this game, which is definitely the sticking point for most people. This is where the game will either win you over or completely lose you. Manhunt is primarily a stealth game where you sneak around and use various household items as weapons to execute people with. This game is basically built around the spectacle of these various executions, because every weapon you find has 3 different levels of execution you can do depending on how long you're able to hold the button down. If you do a certain amount of level 2 or level 3 executions, you get a better grade at the end of the level, and depending on the grade you get, you unlock various things, including cheat codes and bonus levels. So theoretically, there is an incentive to play the game both quickly and effectively, but then how does the game play? Clunkily. Particularly in the controls, like how the right analog stick instead of controlling the camera goes into first-person mode, for some reason. This was acceptable in GTA 3, first of all because it was an experimental game, second of all because the game is open world and therefore a lot more open. Well, duh. So it's a lot easier for the camera to point in the ideal direction, but this is a tight claustrophobic stealth game, and so the result is that in a lot of cases the camera doesn't necessarily point where you want it to at a moment's notice, whether it be around corners or towards key objectives. So you'd want proper camera controls that this game doesn't have. Then there's the weird control decisions, like how pressing both triggers will make you turn around, or the fact that you can invert up and down, but the left and right axis is inverted and there's no way to adjust it. It's one of those things that takes a while to get used to, and once you do, I wouldn't necessarily say the game is great. You mostly just sneak around waiting for your minimap to indicate an enemy, and then you get into a hiding spot, tap the wall to have them walk over to you, and then when they walk back to their patrol route, you get them from behind. It's pretty repetitive. They do mix things up in the sense that they do give you different level layouts with different patrol routes. Maybe you have to deal with multiple guards at once, so you have to be careful with how you distract them lest you kill one but then get the other's attention. Then you also have distraction items and whatnot, plus your noise indicator is also a very big factor in this game. If you run, you make noise. If you step on gravel, you make noise. If you drop from any level of height, you make noise. This can cause you no small amount of grief, as it may indicate your location, especially if you're sneaking up behind someone, because any level of noise while you're sneaking behind someone will make the person you're pursuing turn around instantly, and then your cover is blown. There is a risk-reward factor in doing a level 2 or level 3 execution, because the longer you pursue someone from behind, the more likely you are to have your cover blown for one reason or another. But there's also no real incentive to do a level 2 or level 3 execution if you're playing on the standard difficulty. If you do enough level 3 executions, you get 3 stars for executions, but the maximum you can get on normal difficulty is 4 stars for the level, and you only unlock the worthwhile unlocks if you get 5 stars, which can only be attained on the maximum difficulty. Sure, there's the sheer spectacle, but if I don't have to do something, why should I want to do it, especially on a first playthrough when I just want to get through the game? And even the stealth isn't necessarily the focus all the time, because there are multiple instances, even early into the game, where you'll be forced into combat because you're in a wide open area, or in other cases, somebody will just pop out and attack you. In that case, if you want, you can run around a corner into a dark spot and then wait for them to turn around, but it's also even odds whether or not they'll see you running into the darkness if you do that, nullifying the stealth. And the hand-to-hand combat in this game is wank if you get to that point. It's mostly just blindly walking into someone and punching them until they fall down. And I think every enemy in the game has basically the same amount of health as you because they take a while to go down. So even a single enemy can do monstrous damage to you. Taking on more than one at the same time is a death sentence. things like the forced combat indicates that this game is a little bit too inorganic at times. Like, it's expecting you to follow a certain script, and in some instances, some enemies you're supposed to take head on. Take this situation for example. I knew that this guy was at the top of the stairs, and I knew that there were hiding spots nearby, but I went to the hiding spot and kept tapping the wall, but he never came down the stairs. I have a feeling that I was supposed to engage this guy head on, but I managed to eventually force him into the area with the hiding spot, but that required me aggroing him while I was in the same room as him, but just around the corner. Of course, it's not always about making it from one end of the level to the other with nothing in between but guards. At times, the levels also have various gimmicks. Such as this one level where you have to take out this guy wearing a bunny suit, but that's just a standard level with a moving objective marker. Then there's also the aforementioned level where you have to save your family, and the only difference there is that if you're seen, one of your family members will be executed. Though, not to brag, I managed to save all of them. Then you have the two separate levels where you have to escort someone. In one case it's a hobo, and then in the other case it's this journalist. But those ones just have you repeat the routine where you tell them to hide in the shadows while you go ahead and take out the patrolling guards. The only time one of them got caught was when a guard went directly into the hiding space he was standing in, which never happened with me before, so I think they programmed it that way just to troll you. Also, the journalist freaks out if you move too far away from her for too long, but thankfully that escort only lasts a few minutes. It was actually during the hobo escort level where I really noticed how repetitive and overlong some of these levels were. I know that Rockstar Games is known for long games. Even at this point they were, but it's easy to make a sandbox game long just by having a lot of missions, but in deliberately structured games with a focused gameplay design, it's very easy for things to become repetitive if you try to make the game too long. And I swear, you have to go through the same song and dance with this hobo running ahead to clear out the hostiles and then go back for him like 6 or 7 times. This level takes like 20 minutes, but then again, every level takes 20 to 30 minutes at least the first time through, but normally they only really have enough content to be about half that long. Like this one level in a train yard effectively has you moving in a straight line, taking out cops. But you have to go through like 7 different waves of cops. Also, this game is a bit funky at times, especially with the emulation. There was this crane part in this level fueled by hate. One of the early levels with the skinhead gang as enemies, which is kind of funny because despite you being white and bald, they're still calling you a bunch of names to indicate that they consider themselves superior to you.
Get my hands on that tainted scum and I'll show him some Deep South hospital.
Like, from their ideological perspective, how is James inferior? Well, then again, I guess skinheads don't tend to live by real-world logic.
Do not deny your own impurity.
But anyways, you have to get fuel for this crane, which is an arduous task in itself, but I did that, and I found that the crane wouldn't move. I looked online and found that this doesn't happen if you leave some of the skinheads alive, unfortunately. But then later on into the level, you find yourself at another crane, only this time the door won't open unless you kill everyone in the area, which means I got to the crane and it didn't work once again, and there's no solution that I could find. My game was effectively bricked. So I ended up having to download a save file just so I could play past this one segment. But I'm pretty sure that was an emulation issue, and the rest of the game was relatively stable despite my other issues. But then again, regardless of the strengths or weaknesses of the gameplay or the level design, at the beginning, Manhunt is at least a unique experience. Unique experiences kind of go out the window the moment guns are introduced, which happens less than 1/3 into the game. It doesn't start out too bad. You get a nail gun, which takes like 6 body shots to kill someone and 3 headshots to kill someone, and the only way to get an easy headshot is by getting up in someone's grill. Although even if you're far away, you can still hit the R3 button to go into manual aiming mode and get easy headshots from far away. But then from about the halfway point onward, the game goes gun crazy, which makes Manhunt, quite frankly, obnoxious. Because much like the melee combat, if you have to face more than one person with guns at a time, especially if that number is 3 or more, you might as well bend over and kiss your ass goodbye. There were some levels where I was quick saving and quick loading more often than I was pressing the button to shoot, and I admit that with no shame whatsoever. Because some of those later levels are so long and so filled to the brim with endless amounts of enemies with powerful guns that I honestly have no idea how they expected people to get through without it, especially when they only give you a small handful of healing items. After a while, you basically need to start planning around the gameplay mechanics and AI of this game, rather than trying to use the mechanics to their fullest effect. Like, in these open areas where multiple people are going to be firing at you, there's no way to sneak up on them, so you have to start planning. Like, okay, if I burst around to that corner, I can take out that guy with the shotgun quickly, but then I also have to be careful because these other two guys are in the open and can do chip damage with their revolvers, and if I take too much damage, I have to backtrack to a couple of healing items that I had left over. It's just not very fun. There's two particular scenes I remember from my first playthrough that stick out in my memory. First of all, there's scene 13, Divided They Fall, which starts out in a standard way. James slipped away from Starkweather's militia, but they capture him and take away his weapons, and now you have to take on the militia itself. They could have killed him, but they like the chase, so you have to build up your arsenal by starting out sneaky, then once you get their guns, you can start playing more offensively. So far so good, and this all culminates with a terrible segment where you have 2.5 minutes to take out the militia leader with a shotgun with guys all around you before he calls for backup. In a game where enemies can do significant damage to you in a very short amount of time, only giving you 2.5 minutes to do this means you have to rush, but rushing means you get killed. Back in the day, I almost quit on this level, but after like 8 tries, I managed to make it through. But then shortly after that, you're faced with a situation where a bunch of cops are raiding the building you're in, so you have to take them all out long range with a sniper rifle. Which doesn't sound too bad, but aiming in first person quickly with analog sticks has never been easy, and there are a lot of police officers. If even a couple of them get through, kiss your ass goodbye. This is the level where I definitively quit back in 2016. January of 2016, right after I became legal drinking age. I specifically remember this detail because I remember playing this game when I first tried drinking Jack Daniels. It was also the last time I tried drinking Jack Daniels because, you know, besides the fact that it was memed, that shit's nasty. So I quit both this game and Jack Daniels roughly at the same time, and I never got around to beating the game until now. And these last couple of levels are just... my god. The courtyard level isn't so bad because it's relatively wide open and the concentration of enemies isn't so high. But the level in the mansion, sweet baby Jesus. You have to turn on the elevator and get the key for the elevator, but these objectives are at the opposite ends of the mansion. And in between the two objectives, there's no joke, something like 100 henchmen. It's relentless. I found myself having to lure groups of them into isolated areas and take them all out. But I also had to make sure not to attract too many people because there are so many henchmen that one slight bit too much aggro will have you torn apart by assault rifle bullets. But at least it ends in an interesting way with you having to fight Pigsy, a deranged psycho with a chainsaw and a pig's mask, which I'm pretty sure was a boss from Dead Rising 2. You take him out using stealth attacks and then direct assault at the end. But at this point, even though the game is effectively over, they still don't take it easy on you, as Starkweather sends his last battalion of goons at you, and even Starkweather himself has a gun. But when you finally confront Starkweather, well, you know the phrase from the Bible, do unto others as you would have them do unto you? Well, Cash does that to Starkweather, and that's the end.
Acclaimed movie maker Lionel Starkweather has been found dead today.
You know, I saw someone make the point that despite Cash being an inmate on death row who was already technically executed, he is somehow the most sane person in this game. Although that begs the question, so he gets away after this is all said and done, but like, if they ever recapture him, does he get another dose of lethal injection? Can he be executed twice for the same thing, or is that cruel and unusual punishment? Also, this is treated as some sort of victory, but he's still a criminal who committed a death row worthy offense. So him getting away probably won't work out long term. Overall, I think this game is passable mechanically, though I don't find it particularly good. Then again, it is unlike pretty much any other game you will ever play, which is something worth remarking on in itself. This is something I like about auteur game development and playing by your own rules and no one else's, because I love an experience that's like strapping into someone's weird mind and going for a ride. It's a lot better than games that are designed by committee and take no chances. Even still, by the last few levels, and especially by the end, I just wanted the game to be over. Then also, despite the good and the bad of this game, I find it unsettling. Like, I'm not scared, I just feel gross. I'm not against hyperviolence, but this is presented in such a close-to-the-bone grounded way that it's uncomfortable in the same way that I'd imagine something like a Serbian film is uncomfortable. And I feel like some people relish that feeling of feeling unsettled, and I'm sure some people are gonna be elitist about it, like, oh, you can't handle braining someone with a crowbar, what a pussy, go back to Fortnite. as if that's some sort of gotcha, but I don't know. There's a reason why this game is considered a cult classic and not a bona fide classic. It's just not for everyone, and I think it's a bit egotistical to treat people who can't handle this sort of thing, or just don't like it, as if they're in the wrong, because I don't think anybody's in the wrong. It's just not for everyone. I don't think there's any denying that. But the reason I chose to cover Manhunt this Halloween is because aside from it being a moderately spoopy game in its own right, it also poses a very interesting question. Can violence in gaming go too far? I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people immediately rejecting the question out of principle, and to be fair, I would have done the exact same thing at one point in my life. Here's the thing. Gaming has always been violent to some degree. Even back in the days of the Atari 2600, you were still shooting people in a lot of cases. It's just that those games were so removed from reality that nobody ever thought twice about it. But ever since gaming became realistic enough that you could think twice about it, and once gaming stories became involved enough that the violence could have context, violence in games has been an ongoing debate. But let me be perfectly clear. I'm in favor of gaming being violent in probably 99.9% of cases, because there's so many factors that debunk any arguments against it. Pressing buttons on a controller do not accurately emulate the actions of the on-screen characters. You're able to contextually justify violence in a lot of cases. Studies have shown that having violence as play leads to a decrease of violent tendencies, and more than anything, many games that could be considered violent and even hyper-violent are so stylized and over the top that there's a separation from reality where even if games were shown to cause violent tendencies, so many of them are so over the top in their presentation that there's no way that you could emulate what goes on or could associate it with the real world. Devil May Cry, for example, is a series that in theory is pretty violent, however the action is so stylized and so over the top that there's like 18 degrees of separation from reality. So basically, no matter which way you look at it, there's no correlation between violence in games and real-world violence. The worst that a violent game can do is inspire someone who was already mentally unstable, and that's a whole different can of worms. With that said, however, Manhunt is one of the extremely rare cases where I think that it does maybe go a bit too far, and maybe there is a point to be made about the violence. I'm not necessarily saying I'm for or against it, I'm just saying there's a discussion to be had. I mean, shooting a virtual gun, fair enough. Swinging a virtual sword, fair enough. Detailed, gruesome, and incredibly close-up, almost instructive videos of living, breathing humans being maimed and killed with a bunch of different everyday items with pinpoint accuracy, and having that be the reward for playing the game well? That I'm not so sure about. Legally speaking, this game never inspired any act of violence. In the one case that actually went to court, it turns out the victim was actually the one who played the game, not the perpetrator. But it still feels like it's glorifying the violence in a way that very few games have, and I just think it feels gross and potentially unnecessary, but then again, that's just my own personal feelings. You see, the thing is, even if I don't necessarily like it in this case, I don't advocate for gaming being toned down because, believe it or not, I actually generally like hyperviolence and gore. I've also been playing games for most of my life, if not my entire life, and I view it as more than just some sort of activity to kill time with. I do see it as the newest and most exciting form of interactive storytelling, and until the holodeck from Star Trek is invented, interactive gaming is going to be the last great innovation of entertainment. And the only innovations at this point are going to be innovations within the realm of gaming. With that said, there's no doubt in my mind that stuff like this does make gaming look bad to the general public, and that's really the worst damage that it can do. I mean, sure, if gaming does have a negative reputation, we can tell the general public to shove it, but I find it a shame that even to this day, gaming has never really fully shaken its negative reputation to some people. Sure, it's better than it was in the 90s and 2000s, but it's still a medium that a lot of people don't take seriously. Similar to how it is with animated movies compared to their live-action counterparts. A lot of gaming's reputation spawned from the fact that gaming evolved out of children's toys, and so it took a long time to even tokenly be taken seriously. Whereas something like movies evolved out of theater acting, which has always been considered a very high-class thing. Which I honestly think is why a film adaptation is so often considered the highest honor a video game franchise can have. Because gaming as a whole has a bit of an inferiority complex, so inherently gaming is already working at a disadvantage as far as public perception. And collectively it's been working for decades to try and break that perception, but unfortunately every now and again you have a game like Manhunt that comes along and gets a lot of press and just makes the whole medium look bad. Which I will fully acknowledge, while it's something that I care about, not everyone does. I feel like some people attach so much of their identities to being a gamer that they reject any sort of outside opinion, and in fact, some people even consider it an epic own that these games exist because it flies in the face of those mamby-pamby people who look down on us. But a dirt-flinging contest is not productive for the medium because I don't see gaming as one thing for one demographic of people. I see it like film, like music, like literature, just a medium to bring across a creative idea. It's also a creative medium so unique that a lot of ideas can't cross over seamlessly, which is why I find it such a shame that gaming still has a negative reputation to some degree. And that's why I'm conflicted, because on one hand, I'm for artistic expression, and obviously we shouldn't take seriously the opinions of people who will never in their life pick up a controller, but at the same time, is there a line of good taste that we should or should not cross for the sake of the medium? Is there a point where something is so wantonly violent and absurd that it just outright makes us all look bad? Should we even care? I want to believe that this is a topic with some nuance to it and won't result in just a bunch of angry people on both sides yelling at each other, but I also believe that the internet is far too past the post for that to be the case. Here's what I think. If I were to put a pin in this argument, I would say this. I am for artistic expression. I believe that you should be able to make whatever you want without any sort of restriction outside of legality. However, that does not mean that you are free from criticism or the consequences of the things you make. If you make something that's truly disgusting and truly distasteful, you're not allowed to cry foul if people say as much. That's just the risk you run in a free market. Neither the people who make these things or the fans should get up in arms if people criticize things that are worth criticizing. If you go for shock value or edginess, alienating people or even entire countries is just as likely as attracting a large-scale audience, if not more likely. So I believe that something like Manhunt can and should exist, but I also believe that nobody is wrong for criticizing it, or looking at it in disgust. That's totally within their right. If somebody wants to say if you don't like it, don't play it, I say exactly right. But that's not criticism. That's just the nature of things. And if you want to act like an elitist because some people don't like this sort of thing, you're wrong for doing so. There's no two ways about it. I would like for games like Manhunt or Postal or Hatred to exist and not harm the public perception of gaming, but I do think that there is a predestined bias that some people will never be able to overlook. Some people will just forever look down on gaming as a medium, and we can't change that. So maybe there's no point in trying, but eventually those people will die, or they'll no longer be relevant to the public discourse. And I believe at that point that gaming will have been in the public consciousness for so long that it may have a chance to be looked at alongside things like film or music. At that point, you'll have a good answer as to whether or not games like this will harm the public perception of gaming as a whole, or if they will be looked upon in the same way as grotesque horror movies like the Terrifier series. I've never seen them, but I have friends who are big horror fans, and I've been told in the most affectionate way possible that those are some of the most disgusting movies they've ever seen. But they don't make movies look bad. They're simply their own thing within a larger medium that exists to appeal to a specific demographic. Everyone else can take or leave it. Only time will tell if the same will eventually apply for games, and I do dream of the day when this is the perception, if that day ever comes. But there's no way to say if the perception of gaming in 2003 was harmed overall by Manhunt, or if it not existing would have given the medium a better rep. But I guess that still begs the question. Can gaming go too far in this regard? Historically speaking, no. It kind of reminds me of the heavy metal satanic panic from back in the 80s, and in particular how Judas Priest was dragged into court one day for allegedly causing the death of an 18-year-old through subliminal messaging. But even back in the 80s, which was somewhat of a high point for radical religious groups being anti-current thing, that was thrown out of court. I mean, Rob Halford had to prove in multiple ways that the whole thing was ridiculous, but he still convinced the judge of their side. I even remember the lawyer working on behalf of the grieving family saying something along the lines of, "Justice may not have been served today, but the law is coming for these people, and it eventually will stick."
This certainly isn't going to be the last case like this, and I would certainly file another one tomorrow morning. Sooner or later, a case like this will win. Just a matter of time.
Shut the fuck up!
Yet here we are however many decades later, and the alleged justice still has not been served, because there is no justice to serve. That's why I appreciate bands like Ghost. While I'm not too into their music, I appreciate them for the fact that they play into that satanic stereotype that metal music has, all the while playing some of the softest, most 80s pop music turned metal type music you could imagine. So in answering the question as to whether or not gaming can go too far, my gut says no, because gaming has no correlation with real-world atrocities, but on the topic of the limit of good taste, that's a subjective thing that will change from person to person. I may not find this game very pleasant, but somebody might, and that's totally within their right to do so. So who am I to say what is and isn't a worthwhile way to spend time when, at the end of the day, this is a benign interactive thingamajig that isn't causing any tangible harm to the real world. I may not like it all that much, others may not like it all that much, but that's our right, and nobody's wrong for that. But then again, who's to say that in the future we don't have a more clear-cut case of where to draw the line of good taste? But that's a tomorrow issue, and as for right now, gaming might be able to go too far, but I don't think it ever has, at least not objectively. Subjectively, sure, but objectively, it remains to be seen. And that's all I've got. Happy Halloween, everyone. If you like what I do here and want to support the channel, you can like this video, leave a comment telling me what you think, subscribe, and hit the notification icon so you're always up to date on what I'm doing. I've been the King of Snark Style right here on Tactical Bacon Productions, and I will see you next time. Stay crispy, my friends.
Thank you.